Today, it's a good time to dispel myths about clinical trials and participation in the trials. Medical research is being widely carried across the world. However, India was not very active with participating in clinical trials since people in India were very fearful about participating in trials. However, with a lot of international trials coming into India, we thought today it's a good time to dispel myths about clinical trials and participation in the trials. So I am joined by Dr. Uday Phadke for dispelling myths about clinical trials today. Welcome,
Hi.
sir.
Hi.
So what are clinical trials exactly?
So clinical trials are basically scientifically conducted research protocols in medical sciences. Now, there are a variety of things that clinical trials look at. So how can we prevent a disease? How can we detect a disease? How can we treat it better? By using new modalities of treatment. Now, these treatments could be medicines, it could be some medical devices, it could be even behavioral therapies. And the whole idea is by using these cutting edge technologies that are being developed across the world, can we make things better for patients? Now, ultimately, all the new advances that we see in medicine actually come out through this medical research, because unless research takes place, we will not have these new advances. So, all new treatments that are emerging, and you see a variety of diseases now getting better controlled, are because of this clinical research. And the primary objective is to find out if these modalities are safe and they are effective. So, these are the two main functions of a clinical trial.
So this question commonly comes to one person's mind: why should I volunteer to participate in a clinical trial?
That's a very interesting question, because many people have said that you should participate in a clinical trial to advance science. So, for the greater good of humanity.
Correct.
Now, that's fine, but not many people think that way. They think, why should I do anything for the greater good? Well, if you're a thinking person, that's a good argument to go by, because your participation means a lot for science, and science will gain from it. But from a little more selfish point of view, one could also consider that a new treatment that was hitherto not being tried, or hitherto not effective, is being tried now, and you're getting the opportunity to get into a treatment protocol which no other person has the access to. So that's also a certain kind of selfish point of view. Although, I mean, once I say that you may get access to this kind of cutting edge treatment, remember that not all patients get the active treatment, because always trials, a active drug is always compared with what is called a placebo or an inactive drug, and the distribution is roughly, say, 50-50. But broadly speaking, if you do participate in trials, there are clearly advantages to some people, and clearly advantage to science in general.
Right. So say, sir, I enter a clinical trial. What should I expect to experience during the clinical trial?
So, well, there are several things which happen. A clinical trial is a very closely regulated protocol. So, it's not like usual clinical treatment where a patient decides when to come back to the doctor. It's not always necessary that you are sure that you know that when you tell a patient come back in 2 months, it doesn't mean that he comes back exactly in 2 months. Here, things are very different. So the entire research team is tracking your treatment all the time. So there are many tests that are done, which they are more than what you would do in natural courses. Of course, you don't have to pay for it. Patient is supposed to keep logs of what is happening at home. Maybe, let's say, if it's a diabetes trial, they will be asked to monitor their blood glucose regularly. They also have to report any event that has come up. So normally a patient would not necessarily report a headache or a cold or a cough, but in a clinical trial, every bit of information is recorded. this patient will also need to come to the research site once in a while. Their logs will be checked, their compliance will with medicines will be checked, they'll be issued fresh medicines. So there is a very tightly knit protocol where they are being very actively monitored during the course of the study.
So you did mention about a few benefits of the clinical trials. So would you elaborate on the risks and again on the benefits involved in the clinical trials?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and I think the patient needs to know very clearly that ultimately what is being tested has not yet been approved and it has not undergone a full evaluation. So, yes, there are certain risks associated with, say, new drugs. Although these have been tried on volunteers before, but yes, it's not fully tested, so some risk may be coming up. By and large, the magnitude of the risk also needs to be discussed with the investigator or the doctor in charge. How bad is the risk? Obviously, if the risk is too high, nobody will participate in the trial. Although sometimes one must remember there has been some loss of life also during some trials, but that is now very uncommon. So you must try and understand how the risk goes. On the advantage side, I would say there are several. As I said before, you clearly have access to very modern and possibly very effective therapies. So even diseases which were not cured or controllable earlier have now started developing treatments. You have the access to the best specialists in the treatment modality, because they are the ones who are conducting the trials. Also, because you are very closely tracked, your disease process does that much better. It's always known that people who are in clinical trials always tend to do better than the general patients because they are being very closely tracked all the time. Also, because they are involved in trials and they undergo all these procedures, they get to know a lot about their disease and they're able to handle their disease also better. So even after the clinical trial has ended, they have learned a lot during the clinical trial of how sugars, let's say it's a diabetes trial, how the glucose is tracked, how it is monitored, how we adjusted the doses. That definitely helps them manage their disease better. So these are certain advantages which are clearly there.
So as a patient, when I go to a doctor, so how do I know if I can be a part of the trial or how can I join the clinical trial?
So every trial protocol has a protocol, which means it's very clearly defined as to what this new modality of treatment is trying to do. How long do we plan to test? Who do we want to test? So, for example, in a particular trial, we may want patients, say, between the age of 18 and 40 with some particular disease where the values are below this or above that. So, there are very clear guidelines of who should be recruited. They should not have this, they should not have that, they should not be pregnant, they should not have had a recent, say, heart attack or a stroke. So there are many inclusions and exclusions, we call, and each trial has a particular protocol which is advertised also. It is available at the research site, which you can see, and you can talk to the doctor concerned. He will give you the details and he will also discuss with you whether you are eligible and a good candidate to enter the research protocol. Participation is voluntary. So once you decide to enter the trial, then the future things like informed consent, etc. begins, and then you can participate.
Okay. So say I decide to enter a clinical trial. It's a new thing for me. So what should I be asking the clinical trial team or the investigator or the doctor? What question should I be putting to him?
Very important question. So I, as a patient, would like to know what exactly is my responsibility in the trial. What am I supposed to do? So how many times do I need to come to the hospital? How many times do I need to do the tests at home? How long is the study going to be? Is it What do you expect? Is it really going to harm me? We discussed about the risk and
Right.
benefits. Do you really think the risks are very high? Potential benefits. So that also could be discussed. So what could be the potential benefit if I get the active drug? What are my responsibilities? Yes, and what are my rights also? So suppose something does happen to me, some side effect does happen to me. How will I be protected? So how will my health be protected? So there are very clear guidelines, as you know, in a trial protocol, that if you get a side effect of any drug, it is very closely monitored in the hospital or the research site. It is treated, and a whole lot of people are involved in tracking this. So the right of the patient, all trials are insured, by the way. So if anything goes wrong, the patient does not have to
Okay.
spend. So you should be asking all these questions. You should also be asking whether a institutional ethics committee is monitoring the trial.
Right.
Okay, so nowadays, of course, trials can't happen without these kind of monitoring processes in place, but it should be asked.
Oh.
So responsibility should be clear, right should be clear. And also, we have to remember that this is not a contract. It's not that if you sign, it
Correct.
means you're bound to the
Bound.
trial and you just cannot get out. No. At any point of time, if the person feels, the patient feels, I don't want to continue the trial, you do not have to provide a single reason. You can just say, look, I don't want to continue, I'm leaving the trial, and that's it.
Okay. So these days, for all of us, our privacy is very important. So when it comes to the clinical trial, is my privacy taken care of? Is it protected, and how is it?
So essentially, when a person enters a clinical trial, all the records henceforth are not maintained by name. Number one, a particular code is given to that patient, it becomes a number. Nobody outside this particular place where I have recruited the patient would know that certain Mr. or Mrs. XYZ has entered the trial, because after that it's a name.
Oh.
All data is extremely strictly confidential, and the research team is not allowed to divulge any details of anything about the patient. So it's not like this data is sold to such and such company. The only thing to which the person who has entered the trial has given a kind of tacit consent is that after the trial is over, the data that has been collected will be collated and published, but without names.
Without.
So it's not that this is Uday Phadke's data that we are presenting. No, it's these 100 patients. This is the overall worldwide figure, and these are the final values. So your confidentiality is always protected.
Okay.
That's a very important part of the trial. Yeah.
So one last question, sir. So what happens when the whole duration of the clinical trial ends?
So when the clinical trial duration ends, of course, you stop taking whatever active drug or the placebo that you were given, and you go back to whatever standard of care which your physician who is treating you feels appropriate. Now, whatever data has accrued during the course of the clinical trial is then carefully analyzed, some statistical methods are applied to it, and professional science writers will compile a paper which will typically go for a publication in a major international journal. And then, if that data has stood the test of science, by and large, that drug will get developed for clinical use over a period of time. But that's for later. Your responsibility ends after the clinical trial period is over, and then future treatment is done at the discretion of your own physician.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. This was a very insightful discussion. I hope this has dispelled a lot of myths, and people will be looking forward to involving in the trials and participating in the clinical trials.
Absolutely. So there was this myth that we are being used as guinea pigs.
Right.
That's not necessarily true. Yes, you are being considered as subjects on whom research is being done, but unless that is done, science will never progress.
Correct.
And be assured that this particular clinical trial process is extremely tightly regulated by multiple international bodies. It is very tightly bound by certain ethical guidelines, by the Indian government, by the insurance people, by the pharma industry. So it's not something which is casual, which you and I sit and decide.
Right.
It's very tightly knit and regulated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.